The words sliced through the air with the clean, cold edge of the glass and steel that framed the penthouse office. Not now. Alastair Finch didn't look at her. His gaze, a precise weapon, was fixed on the holographic display shimmering in the air above his obsidian desk. On it, 3 faces, 2 men and 1 woman, all looking equally strained, floated like anxious ghosts. They were in Shanghai, it was past midnight there, and the deal was bleeding out. "I don't care about the provincial regulations," Alastair clipped, his voice a low growl of controlled fury. "Make them understand what a billion-dollar direct investment does to a province. It doesn't bend to regulations, it becomes the regulation." Imani Reed, the subject of his initial dismissal, paused mid-stride. Her hand, holding a crystal glass of iced water, remained perfectly steady. Not a single drop shivered. Years of practice had taught her how to become a ghost, how to move through rooms like these as if she were merely a trick of the light, a necessary but unnoticed part of the expensive furniture. Her purpose was to erase traces of human life, a stray fingerprint on a chrome leg, a faint ring of condensation, the dust that dared to settle on surfaces worth more than the house she grew up in. In the corner of the vast room, another ghost resided. Leo, Alastair's 7-year-old son, sat on a white leather Eames chair, his small form swallowed by its iconic design. He was not looking at the shimmering display or at his father's consuming rage. He was staring at his own hands, which lay unnaturally still in his lap. He hadn't spoken a full sentence in 6 months, not since his mother had packed 2 suitcases and left the same way she had lived with them, quietly, and without a trace. Alastair treated his son's silence the same way he treated the rest of his immaculate, sterile world, as something to be managed, scheduled, and if it became inconvenient, ignored. Imani continued her silent path to the desk. Her rubber-soled shoes made no sound on the polished Italian marble. She knew Mr. Finch's rhythms. He drank exactly 8 glasses of iced water a day, 1 every 90 minutes. He preferred the ice to be crushed, not cubed. He liked the glass to be placed precisely 3 inches to the left of his keyboard, aligned with the silver bezel of the monitor. Her job was 1,000 tiny rituals of invisibility, a performance of silent, perfect service. She reached the desk, her movements fluid and economical. As she gently placed the glass down in its designated spot, Alastair's focus finally broke from the call. His eyes, the color of a stormy sea, flickered to her. It wasn't a look of recognition, but of annoyance, as if a cleaning drone had malfunctioned and strayed into his line of sight. That's when he spoke the rest of the line, not to the panicked faces on the screen, but to her, to the empty space she occupied. "You're here to keep the background clean, not to be in it." The words were not shouted. They were worse. They were delivered with the flat, emotionless finality of a banker closing a vault. He had already turned back to his call, the dismissal so complete he didn't even wait to see her reaction. "Listen to me, all of you. This isn't a negotiation anymore. It's a matter of infrastructure. Send the revised offer." Imani stood there for a single, frozen second. The air in the room seemed to thin, the silence from the corner where Leo sat growing louder. She could feel the stares of the holographic faces, their images momentarily distorted as they registered her presence, this unexpected variable in their high-stakes equation. A black woman in a simple gray uniform, standing at the center of a billion-dollar meltdown. An object out of place. Her training, her very survival in these rarefied spaces, commanded her to retreat, to evaporate. But her mind was a furious, silent storm. She thought of the law degree she had earned at night, the one tucked away in a box in her small apartment. She thought of the complex arbitration cases she used to read about, the intricate dance of language and power she had once dreamed of joining. She thought of all the parts of herself she had to meticulously clean away each morning when she put on this uniform. Would you endure this, to be seen as nothing more than the smudges you wipe away? Her face, however, remained a mask of serene neutrality. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a gesture of acknowledgement that cost her a mountain of pride to produce. She turned, her back straight, and walked away from the desk, from the silent boy in the chair, and from the man who saw her as nothing more than a pair of hands that cleaned his world. As she moved toward the door, she allowed herself one small, defiant act. Her eyes swept across the secondary monitor on Alastair's desk, the one displaying the Mandarin version of the contract for the Shanghai delegation. Her gaze snagged on a single line, a complex indemnity clause. Her mind, sharp and hungry for the language it so rarely used, translated it instantly. And she saw the error. It was a small thing, a single character misplaced, but it was an error so profound, so catastrophic that it inverted the entire meaning of the agreement. It wasn't a shield for Alastair's company. It was a self-destruct sequence. Her hand was on the door. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She was just the background. She was there to clean. She pulled the door silently shut, leaving the master of the universe to fight for a kingdom he had already, unknowingly, given away. The day after the abortive video call, a funereal tension hung over the penthouse. The Shanghai delegation was arriving in person for a final, desperate attempt to salvage the merger. Imani was tasked with ensuring the grand conference room, with its panoramic view of the city, was flawless. She moved with quiet efficiency, polishing the sprawling mahogany table until it reflected the gray sky like a dark, still lake. Alastair Finch's executive team began to file in, a flock of expensive dark suits and nervous energy. They paid her no more attention than they would a potted plant. She was scenery. A junior executive, a young man named Marcus with a prematurely furrowed brow, strode in, clutching a leather-bound folio. He stopped abruptly when he saw her near the head of the table. "Hey," he said, his tone sharp. "Can you not be here? We're about to handle things that are way above your pay grade." He gestured vaguely at the documents in his folio as if their mere proximity to her might somehow devalue them. He then turned to a colleague and smirked. "Make sure you don't smudge the ink," he said, just loud enough for Imani to hear. "It's worth more than you are." The colleague offered a tight, sycophantic laugh. Imani felt a familiar, hot flush of anger rise in her chest, but her expression remained placid. Her eyes drifted to the documents Marcus had carelessly placed on the table. It was the same contract from the day before, the one with the catastrophic error. She saw the heading, typed in elegant Mandarin characters: Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter, Chinese letter. Heizuou Zaren Ziyi Cooperation and Liability Agreement. Her gaze caught her own reflection in the polished surface of the table. A woman in a simple uniform, her face calm, her hands holding a dust cloth, and clipped to the collar of her gray tunic, the small laminated plastic rectangle that defined her existence in this world. It was her ID badge. The photo was a bland, straight-faced shot from 5 years ago. Beneath it, in stark, black capital letters, were 2 words: Imani Reed Housekeeping. That badge was a wall. It was a label that superseded any other identity she might possess. In this building, she was not a woman with a mind that could dissect legal arguments in 2 languages. She was not a person with dreams deferred. She was housekeeping. The badge was both her keycard and her cage, granting her access to every room while rendering her invisible inside them. She looked at the powerful men arranging their papers, their own badges displayed on lanyards: Senior VP, Legal Counsel, and understood that in their eyes, her badge did not name her, it erased her. Would you tolerate this kind of daily erasure, wearing a label that silences every other part of you? She finished her work, collected her supplies, and walked towards the door, the quiet click of the closing latch the only sound she made. She had seen the trap laid bare on the table, and the men who were about to walk into it had just reminded her she wasn't even qualified to watch. An hour later, the panic began. It started as a low murmur from the executive lounge, then escalated into a series of sharp, frantic footsteps in the hallway. Imani was arranging flowers in the main foyer when she saw Alastair Finch's personal assistant, a young woman who usually radiated an aura of unflappable calm, rush past with a stricken look on her face. Imani could piece together the story from the fractured, panicked whispers she overheard. The interpreter, a renowned professional named Dr. Chen, was stuck. A multi-car pileup on the interstate had shut down all lanes of traffic. He was, for all intents and purposes, trapped in a metal box miles away, and he would not be arriving. Not for hours. The Chinese delegation, led by a formidable chairman named Mr. Y, was already seated in the conference room. They were men for whom punctuality was not a courtesy but a measure of respect. This delay, compounded by the previous day's tense negotiations, was being interpreted as a profound, unforgivable insult. Alastair's voice, tight with fury, boomed from the conference room. "What do you mean he's not coming? Get a helicopter. Get the police. I don't care what it takes." The situation was spiraling out of control. The entire merger, the culmination of 2 years of work and the key to the future of Finch Corporation, was about to detonate over a traffic jam. Alastair's empire was teetering on the brink. The stakes were no longer just financial, they were personal, a public humiliation in the making. Manny stood by a vase of white orchids, her hands perfectly still. She knew the truth. The interpreter's absence wasn't the real disease, it was merely a symptom that was bringing the illness to a head. The real problem was still lying on that table, a silent poison pill nestled within the elegant calligraphy of the contract. They thought they were fighting a fire in the kitchen, but the foundations of the house were about to give way. The situation had now reached a point of no return. Soon, in their desperation, they would try to muddle through the contract on their own, using their high school-level Mandarin and faulty translation apps. And then, the trap would spring. The question was no longer if she should act, but when. What would you do next, knowing you held the only key, but the door was locked by people who refused to see you? The countdown had begun. Inside the conference room, the air was thick enough to choke on. Marcus, the junior executive, was now the designated point person for the translation effort, a field promotion born of pure desperation. He stood sweating in his $1,000 suit, his phone held out like a talisman. He was using a popular translation app, aiming its camera at the complex legal document. "Mr. Y," he began, his voice cracking, "the app says this section is about retroactive kindness." Mr. Y's stony expression hardened. He exchanged a look of cold contempt with his lieutenant. The term he was trying to translate was Su Jai Bachang, retroactive indemnity, a dense legal concept. The app, a tool for tourists ordering coffee, had butchered it into an absurdity. Manny was in the adjoining service pantry, ostensibly restocking the mini-fridge, but the pantry had a discreet service door to the conference room, which was slightly ajar. She could see and hear everything. She watched Marcus's humiliation, his technological crutch failing him at the worst possible moment. As he fumbled with the phone, she passed by the open service door on her way to the waste disposal. Under her breath, almost a whisper to herself, she murmured the correct phrase. Su Jai Bachang de Falu Zia Ali, the legal force of retroactive indemnity. Her delivery was soft, but the acoustics of the marble entryway carried the sound. A young man, a junior administrative assistant named David who had been tasked with taking notes, was standing near the door. David was a third-generation Chinese-American who had grown up speaking conversational Mandarin, but had no legal training. His head snapped up, his eyes locked onto Manny, his expression a mixture of shock and utter disbelief. He had understood her perfectly. He knew not only that her pronunciation was flawless, but that the words she used were sophisticated, technical, and absolutely correct. He started to take a step toward her, but Marcus, oblivious, slammed his hand on the table. "This is useless. Get legal back in here. Now," he shouted, his face flushed with failure. The small win, the brief moment of connection with David, was immediately swallowed by the wave of panic. David shrank back, his mouth clamped shut, his eyes darting from Manny to his furious boss. The chance was gone. Leaving the corporate battlefield, Manny sought refuge in the quiet of the residential wing. She found Leo in his designated playroom, a space so curated and minimalist it looked more like a modern art installation than a place for a child. He was not playing with any of the expensive, educational toys. He was sitting on the floor, surrounded by the scattered pieces of an intricate wooden puzzle box. It was a beautiful object, carved from sandalwood, with complex interlocking parts. He wasn't trying to solve it. He was just running his small fingers over the smooth, carved surfaces, his face a mask of lonely concentration. The shouting from the business wing was still faintly audible, a distant, angry hum. Leo flinched at a particularly loud exclamation from his father. Imani saw the tremor run through his small body. She entered the room and, without a word, sat on the floor across from him. She didn't try to touch him or the puzzle. She simply shared his silence, creating a small island of calm in his turbulent world. After a few minutes, she began to hum. It was the same gentle Mandarin lullaby she had hummed before, a simple, ancient melody about a boat sailing on a quiet river. Zaya O-chan King King Pio, the little boat, gently floating. Leo's fingers stilled on the puzzle piece. He lifted his head slowly, his large, dark eyes fixing on her. There was no fear in them, only a deep, unnerving curiosity. He watched her, his head tilted, as if her melody were a language he could understand far better than the harsh English words that usually filled the air. He picked up one of the puzzle pieces, a small, carved bird, and pushed it across the polished floor until it touched the toe of her shoe. It was a silent offering, an act of trust so profound it made Imani's breath catch in her throat. She looked from the small wooden bird to the boy's searching face. This child, who lived in a world of wealth and power, was starved for the one thing money could not buy, a moment of simple, uncomplicated human connection. In that instant, her resolve hardened. Her fight wasn't just about a contract anymore. It was about this boy. If you were there, would you step closer or stay silent? She knew she had to step closer, not for the company, but for the child no one else saw. That night, sleep was an impossibility. Imani lay in her bed in her small, neat apartment miles away from the penthouse, but her mind was still in that conference room. The characters of the flawed clause burned behind her eyelids. She parsed the sentence again and again, not just as a translator, but as the lawyer she had once trained to be. The clause in question was Section 14B. It was designed to address long-term liability in the joint venture. The correct standard character would have been Chinese letter Hu, signifying mutuality or reciprocity. A shared shield, but the character in the contract was Chinese letter Hu, which meant after or behind. It was a brilliant, almost invisible piece of corporate sabotage. To a non-native speaker or a simple translation app, the difference would be negligible. But in the dense context of legal Mandarin, the change was catastrophic. The clause no longer read, "Both parties share mutual liability for unforeseen market-based losses." It now read, "Party B assumes liability for losses that emerge after the initial market assessment." Party B was Alastair Finch. She sat up, the scale of the deception making her feel cold. This wasn't an error. This was a deliberate, perfectly executed trap. 6 months after the merger, when the initial integration was complete, Mr. Y's company could dump all of its riskiest, underperforming assets into the new joint entity, and Finch Corp. would be legally obligated to absorb 100% of the losses. It was a corporate Trojan horse that would bankrupt the company from the inside out. She whispered the truth of it into the darkness of her room, the words tasting like acid. "He thinks he's signing a shield, but it's a dagger that activates in 6 months." The choice before her was now stark and terrifying. To comply with her role meant to stand by and watch a man, an arrogant, dismissive man, but a man nonetheless, lose everything while his silent son watched. To resist, to speak the truth, meant risking her job, her security, and inviting the wrath of people who saw her as less than human. The next morning, armed with a terrible clarity, Imani knew she had to try one last time to work within the system. She found David, the young assistant, by the coffee machine in the staff kitchen. His eyes widened in panic when he saw her approach. "Please," he said, his voice a low, pleading whisper before she could even speak. "I can't. I'm sorry. I have student loans. My parents, they depend on me. If I go to them and say the cleaning lady found a legal error that all our lawyers missed, they won't listen. They'll just fire me for being crazy." "David, you understood what I said," Imani implored, keeping her voice even. "You know I'm right. This is bigger than your job. It's everyone's job." "To them, you're not a lawyer," he shot back, his fear making him cruel. "You're housekeeping." You're not supposed to even look at those documents. They'll ruin you, and me, just for talking to you." He grabbed his coffee and practically fled the room, leaving her standing alone, the gulf between her knowledge and her status wider than ever. Her sense of isolation was complete. The one person who might have corroborated her claim was now terrified of her. As she turned to leave the kitchen, she almost collided with Alistair Finch. He was on his way to the conference room for the final signing ceremony, his face a mask of grim determination. He had clearly managed to smooth things over, likely with a groveling apology and a larger check. He saw her, and a flash of irritation crossed his face. He didn't even seem to remember their earlier encounters. She was just a persistent, out-of-place obstacle. He pointed a rigid finger down the long, opulent hallway that led back to the residential wing. "Your work is over there," he said, his voice cold as ice. "Stay there." The command was absolute. The door to being heard had not just been closed, it had been bolted and sealed. She was a ghost, and he had just ordered her back to the graveyard. She watched him stride toward the conference room, a king walking confidently to his own execution. The weight of her choice pressed down on her. What would you sacrifice to stay true to what you know is right? Her job, her safety. Or could she live with the silence, knowing what it would cost everyone? She felt something inside her break, or perhaps it was something hardening into a vow. The signing was scheduled for 1000 a.m. From the hallway, Imani could hear the forced pleasantries, the clink of glasses, the low murmur of two languages failing to connect. It was the sound of a slow-motion catastrophe. She pictured Alistair picking up the expensive fountain pen, his signature a flourish of self-destruction. She saw Mr. Y's barely concealed smile of triumph. But then, another image flooded her mind: Leo, sitting on the floor, pushing a small wooden bird across the vast, empty space between them. The boy's silent plea was louder than all the corporate jargon in the next room. He had no one else. His father, in his arrogant blindness, was about to sacrifice his son's future for a hollow victory. That was it, the breaking point. Imani walked to a marble pedestal in the foyer that held a single, dramatic sculpture. With a steady hand, she reached up to the collar of her uniform. Her fingers closed around the plastic edges of her ID badge. The badge that had defined her, limited her, and erased her. She looked at the bland photo, the stark black letters, housekeeping. With a decisive click, she unclipped it. She placed the badge on the cool, smooth marble of the pedestal next to the sculpture. She laid it face down. Her identity, the one they had assigned her, was now shed. She took a deep, steadying breath, the air filling her with a terrifying, liberating calm. This is where everything could flip. Her plan was simple and had only one step: walk through the door and speak the truth. The consequences could wait. She straightened her uniform, which no longer felt like a costume of servitude but like armor. Then, with a posture as poised and dignified as any CEO, she turned and walked toward the open double doors of the conference room. She was no longer Imani Reed, housekeeping. She was Imani Reed, and she was about to enter the proving ground. Imani stepped across the threshold. A stunned silence fell over the room. Alistair Finch, pen in hand, froze mid-signature. The Chinese delegates looked up, their polite smiles instantly vanishing. Marcus the executive stared, his mouth agape. Security guards posted by the wall tensed, ready to move. Before anyone could speak, before a single order to remove her could be barked, Imani spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it was clear, calm, and resonant, filling the space with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from her. She did not address Alistair. She looked directly at Chairman Y. Y Dong Shi Zhang, Wo Kenking Nin de Quanchu, Danchi Ji Fen Wanjian de Tio Quan Shisi Bi, Kunzai Yij Kending Hui Deaji Wuji de Zimian Fanjuan. Chairman Y, I beg your forgiveness for this interruption, but Section 14B of this document contains a literal inversion that will guarantee future misunderstanding. The effect was electric. The delegates, who had been listening to clumsy, translated approximations of their language all morning, now heard their native tongue spoken with the precision and formal grace of an academic. Alistair finally found his voice. "What the hell is this? Get her out of here." But Mr. Y held up a hand, silencing him. His eyes, narrowed in suspicion, were fixed on Imani. "Continue," he said in Mandarin. Imani walked calmly to the large whiteboard at the front of the room. She picked up a black dry erase marker. The cap came off with a soft pop. On the clean white surface, she wrote two characters, large and clear, Chinese letter VS. "Chinese letter this," she said, circling the first character, Chinese letter, "is who it means mutual, reciprocal. It is the foundation of a partnership." Then she circled the second character. "And this is who it means after or behind. It is the foundation of a trap. Your contract uses this character." She proceeded to unpack the legal and financial implications with breathtaking clarity. She spoke in Mandarin to the delegates, explaining the cultural nuance of trust and the insult of such a deception. Then she switched to flawless English for Alastair's team, explaining the catastrophic financial exposure, the breach of fiduciary duty, the inevitable shareholder lawsuits. She wasn't just translating words, she was translating consequences. The room was utterly still, the occupants caught in the grip of her quiet, powerful competence. When she finished, there was a beat of profound silence. Then Mr. Y's lieutenant, a man who had not shown a flicker of emotion all day, whispered in awe, "Ta da falu jishi by women de tuan dui hai shen." Her legal knowledge, it is deeper than our own team's. Alastair Finch stood motionless, his face pale, the pen having slipped from his fingers. The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been completely and irrevocably inverted. And the person holding all the power was the woman he had told to go clean the floors. Did you feel that shift? The entire room did. It was the tectonic crack of a world being remade. The deal was not signed. Instead, the next 2 hours were spent in a state of controlled shock as Imani, at the head of the conference table, calmly mediated a path forward. She dictated the precise language needed to correct the clause, her authority absolute and unquestioned. The deal was saved, or rather, a new, fair deal was born from the ashes of the old one. When the delegates finally departed, they did so by approaching Imani first, each giving her a formal, respectful bow. Mr. Y paused before her. "Nin de Kanang Zai Jelly Bay Langfail," he said quietly, "your talent is wasted in this place." After they were gone, a heavy silence filled the room. Alastair Finch, looking older and smaller than he had just hours before, finally approached her. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a raw, bewildered humility. Who are you?" he asked, the question a genuine plea for understanding. "I'm Imani," she said, her voice soft. He started to stammer, offering apologies, money, promotions. "I'll give you anything. A blank check, name your position, head of international legal, a corner office, a car, anything." Imani listened patiently. The anger she had held for so long had evaporated, replaced by a sense of weary purpose. Revenge felt petty. Vengeance was a small, hot thing, and the justice she wanted was large and cool. She didn't want to punish the men who had dismissed her. She wanted to fix the system that had made them blind. "I don't want a bonus," she said, her gaze steady. "I don't want an office." She paused, letting her words sink in. "What does real justice look like here? Not a payout, but a change. I want you to build a system," she continued, "so that you never, ever waste a person's talent again. I want a program that finds the hidden skills of every single person who works in this building, from the janitors to the mailroom clerks to the people you never see. I want you to find the value you've been throwing away every single day." She took a small breath. "And I want you to go home tonight and help your son solve his puzzle." Alastair stared at her, the two requests landing with the force of a physical blow. One was a challenge to his entire corporate philosophy. The other was a challenge to his soul. 3 months later, a company-wide memo announced the launch of the Finch Corporation Hidden Talents Initiative. It was not a vague suggestion box or a token HR program. It was a concrete, systemic overhaul of the company's recruitment and promotion pipeline. Imani, retained as a high-level consultant, had been its chief architect. The policy had several key non-negotiable components. The whole-person dossier. Every employee, from the moment of hiring, was required to confidentially document their entire skill set. This went beyond resumes to include language fluencies, prior degrees regardless of field, certifications, specialized training, and even significant hobbies that involved project management or technical skill. This database was named the Locus. Internal first mandate. Before any new job opening was posted externally, the director of the new Internal Mobility Department, a position created by the policy, was required to run a deep search of the locus for qualified candidates. A formal report had to be generated proving no internal candidate was viable before an external search could begin. The Maid grant, a significant portion of the professional development budget, was reallocated to a fund that would pay for employees to get new certifications or degrees in fields where the company had a need, creating a pipeline of homegrown talent. The policy was specific, measurable, and had teeth. Alastair Finch himself announced it at a town hall meeting, his voice devoid of its usual arrogance. He named the policy, he explained who would enforce it, and he outlined how its success would be measured by tracking the percentage of promotions filled from within, starting with the company's lowest paid tiers. Would this change be enough in your workplace? For the employees of Finch Corp, it was the beginning of a seismic shift. The resistance from some mid-level managers was palpable, but the directive from the top was absolute. The path was now open. One evening, Imani was working late in the small, functional office they had given her, finalizing the rollout plan. She heard a soft knock on her door. It was Alastair. He looked different, tired but in a way that seemed more human. "Can I show you something?" he asked. He led her not to the boardroom but to his penthouse. The vast living area was bathed in the soft light of the city at dusk. In the center of the room, on the floor, sat Leo, and he was not silent. He was chattering away, explaining something with the breathless excitement of a 7-year-old. On the floor in front of him was the sandalwood puzzle box, and it was solved. Its intricate pieces were slotted together, forming a perfect, beautiful whole. Alastair stood by the door, watching his son. "The last piece," he said quietly to Imani. "I couldn't figure it out. It looked like it shouldn't fit." Leo saw it. He turned it on its side. "Said it only works if you look at it from a different angle." Imani smiled. "He's a very smart boy." Just then, Leo looked up and saw her. A huge grin spread across his face. He ran to his father and tugged on his hand. Then he spoke his first clear, complex sentence to him in over 6 months. "Baba, she ta jayo woda." "Daddy, she's the one who taught me." Alastair looked from his son's bright, happy face to Imani, and his eyes filled with a raw, unguarded gratitude. It had nothing to do with the merger or the stock price. It was the quiet, profound relief of a man who had been given back something he thought he had lost forever. In that moment, Imani wasn't an employee or a consultant. She was the person who had shown him how to see his own son. She had reclaimed her own definition, and in doing so, had helped him reclaim his. The official press launch for the Hidden Talents Initiative was a major event. Reporters, industry analysts, and employees filled the company's largest auditorium. Imani had insisted on no special recognition, worried it would turn the story into a cheap, sentimental spectacle and undermine the seriousness of the policy itself. Alastair had, to her surprise, understood completely. He took the stage and delivered a speech unlike any he had ever given. He didn't talk about profits or projections. He talked about blindness. "A company's greatest liability," he began, his voice steady, "is not in its balance sheets. It is in its blind spots. It is in the talent you have but do not see, the value you possess but do not recognize." He told the story of a hypothetical company that had a world-class engineer on staff but had them sorting mail, a brilliant financial analyst but had them cleaning floors. He never used her name. He never even specified a gender. He kept the story universal. "This initiative is our commitment to learning how to see." It was inspired by the simple, powerful realization that the most valuable assets in our company were the ones we weren't counting. Excellence can be found anywhere if you are humble enough to look for it. As he finished, he glanced briefly, almost imperceptibly, toward the third row where Imani sat. It was not a gesture of thanks, but of acknowledgement, a shared understanding. She gave a small, slow nod in return, The applause that filled the room wasn't for a hero, it was for an idea. And because of that, it opened a door not just for her, but for everyone like her. A year later, the Hidden Talents Initiative was a roaring success. The first official promotion through the program was a young woman from the catering staff who, the Locust database revealed, had a degree in software engineering she'd earned in her home country of Nigeria. Imani, now in a permanent role as the chief strategy officer for the program, was walking the newly promoted engineer to her office. As they passed through the lobby of the Employee Training Center, Imani paused. Hanging on the wall, in a simple, elegant frame under museum-grade glass, was her old ID badge. The bland photo, the plastic laminate, the stark black letters, Imani read housekeeping. The young engineer looked at it, then back at Imani, confused. That, Imani said softly, was my first title here. She looked at the object that had once been the symbol of her invisibility, the physical manifestation of the world's misjudgment. Now, it was an icon. It was the founding artifact of their new culture. Then and now, she added, a faint smile on her lips. She tapped the glass of the frame. Never let the title they give you, she said, her voice full of gentle strength, be the definition of who you are. Did the object's meaning change for you too? For everyone in this building it had. It was no longer a sign of a low-status job. It was a testament to the boundless, often hidden potential of every human being. It was a promise of quiet readiness for the future. The final scene is not of Imani in a boardroom. It is not of a soaring stock price or a new corporate acquisition. It is the simple image of Alastair Finch and his son, Leo, leaving the towering headquarters of Finch Corp. At 5 o'clock on a Tuesday, the sun is setting, casting a warm, golden light on the city streets. Alastair is not on his phone. He is not barking orders at an assistant. He is holding his son's hand. They are laughing about something, a joke only they seem to understand. As they walk past the grand glass entrance of the building, the screen in the lobby behind them displays the official charter of the Hidden Talents Initiative, the words glowing softly in the fading light. The corporation had been saved, its finances secured, its future bright. But the quiet, profound healing of a father and son, that was the true legacy. Imani's competence had not just fixed a broken contract, it had shown a broken man how to be a father. The rooms of the penthouse were no longer cold and sterile. The company was no longer blind. A quiet dignity had settled over everything, a lasting impact born not from a public spectacle, but from a single private act of courage, whose quiet excellence taught you how to see the world differently. For Alastair Finch, and for the entire company he built, the answer would always be Imani Reed.